Super. Hello, I'm Reb Chaya Lerner, and this is the ongoing training with the Rabbinic Pastor Association and Hoala, and we are honored today to have Rabbi Sue Morningstar. So I'm going to turn over to you, Sue, to Rabbi Sue, to talk about disability and pastoral care.
Thank you, Reb Chaya. Can you hear me okay? I grew up in a loving Orthodox Jewish community in New York. I married my kindergarten sweetheart at age 21 and had my children young. And with my family, I traveled across the country in a school bus looking for a better life. We landed in Oregon where we joined a commune and I became a home birth midwife. My first and primary profession has always been women's health. I got my master's degree in midwifery in 1989, and it was 20 years later that I fell in love with Jewish renewal and Reb Zalman and became ordained as a renewal rabbi in 2009. 5 years later, I became a mashpia ruchanit through the Hashpa'ah spiritual direction program of Aleph. Currently, I work as a women's health nurse practitioner, spiritual counselor, and part-time rabbi in beautiful Ashland, Oregon. Along the way, at age 32, while studying for my midwifery degree with two small children and a husband in medical school, I contracted a mysterious neurological illness, which left me unable to walk within a few short months and took over 3 years to diagnose. I took a medical leave and sank into a very dark period of depression until my family's love pulled me out of bed and back to school, where I became the first person using a wheelchair in the country to graduate from a nurse midwifery program. I wear many hats, but my life is clearly centered around my family, being a wife and life partner of 47 years, the mother of 2 grown children and their partners, and the bubby of 5 grandchildren, all of whom live close by and fill my life with purpose and joy, and my love. I'm not a disabilities scholar. I'm not a disabilities expert. I'm not a disabilities activist. I've simply been living the life with disability for the past 36 years. This class is an intersection of my personal and professional lives, and I'm honored to be here. So let's start with the definition of disability. The federal government defines a person with a disability as someone who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. There are 54 million disabled people in the U.S. Some disabilities are apparent, people who are in wheelchairs or blind, and some are hidden. Hidden disabilities like traumatic brain injuries, seizure disorder, diabetes, cancer, learning disabilities, ADHD, chronic pain, mental illness, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, heart disease, HIV/AIDS. Some are congenital from birth. Some are acute, usually due to an accident. Some are chronic, and some are progressive. Each has different and unique pastoral and counseling needs. For instance, my friend Laura, who had a snowboarding accident and in 1 second became unable to walk or move her entire left side, but has a good prospect for a full recovery, has different pastoral needs from someone who has a spinal cord injury and suddenly becomes disabled for life, which is very different from someone newly diagnosed with a progressive neurological illness, such as MS or ALS or Parkinson's, and is experiencing the shock of adjusting to a completely new and different worldview. And they have totally different pastoral needs from someone like myself, dealing with a chronic progressive disease over decades and constantly in the process of accepting and adjusting to loss. As a person with a chronic progressive disability, I can share with you one small part of my challenges dealing with increasing symptoms over time. One example of many is that I started out using crutches. After a few months, I needed the stability of a walker. And soon after that, I needed to use a manual wheelchair that I folded up into the back seat when I was driving. I remember vividly the evening that I was driving with my husband, and I saw a light turning red up ahead and realized that I couldn't lift my leg from the gas to the brake, and that I had to stop driving that minute. Then I took lessons and learned to drive with hand controls, and after about 7 years of getting around in a manual wheelchair, I lost the strength to push myself and graduated to a power wheelchair, which meant that I needed a wheelchair van with a power ramp. That served me for a few decades until about 4 years ago, when I had to stop driving altogether. Since then, I have lost the ability to travel completely, except in my very specialized adapted RV. When my mother lay dying in Florida last March, I was limited in communicating with her and felt the huge grief of her death from a distance, isolated from my family. So when we come into contact with a person dealing with the challenges of disability, it is important to assess where they are emotionally, chronologically, and spiritually. What is hitting them the hardest? And how are they adapting? How much pain, frustration, exclusion are they experiencing? How much support do they have, both physical and emotional? And how can we be the most helpful, empathic, and empowering to them? And it is completely different for each individual and changes over time. I wanted to share a small vignette from the book Tuesdays with Maury by Mitch Albom, a book chronicling the end of Maury Schwartz's life and the lessons learned from his challenges facing ALS. About halfway through the book, Albom says, Maury lost his battle. Someone was now wiping his behind. He faced this with typically brave acceptance. It took some getting used to, Maury said, because it was, in a way, complete surrender to the disease. The most personal and basic things had now been taken from him. Going to the bathroom, wiping his nose, washing his private parts. With the exception of breathing and swallowing his food, he was dependent on others for nearly everything. I asked Maury how he managed to stay positive through that. Mitch, it's funny, he said. I'm an independent person, so my inclination was to fight all of this. I felt a little ashamed because our culture tells us we should be ashamed if we can't wipe our own behind. But then I figured, forget what the culture says. I'm not going to be ashamed. What's the big deal? He goes on to say, and you know what? The strangest thing, I began to enjoy my dependency. And now I enjoy when they turn me over on my side and rub cream on my behind so I don't get sores, or when they wipe my brow or massage my legs. I revel in it. I close my eyes and soak it up, and it seems very familiar to me. It's like going back to being a child again. The truth is, when our mothers held us, rocked us, stroked our heads, none of us ever got enough of that. We all yearn in some way to return to those days when we are completely taken care of. Unconditional love, unconditional attention. Most of us didn't get enough. So what a beautiful reframe and lesson in surrender that is. For me, with each progression, I felt resistance. And yet each progression held an opportunity to sink or swim. This process has continued throughout my life in large and small ways and requires a tremendous groundedness to reach the place of acceptance, adjusting, adapting, and even gratitude without sinking into depression, bitterness, or anger. This is not an easy task, and I've been inspired by others like Maury Schwartz, Ram Dass, who continued teaching for 20 years after his debilitating stroke, Rabbi Julia Watts-Belzer, Nancy Mayers, and others. What do all forms of disability have in common? Every disability requires adjusting to loss. And what are some of the losses? Loss of self-image, dreams of the future, perceived power, independence, ability to work, ability to travel, sexual issues, parenting issues, financial burdens, others' images of myself, friendships. When we talk about disability rights, what do we mean? People with disability want what everyone wants, to be able to participate fully in society. Autonomy, non-discrimination, inclusion, respect, equality, accessibility. In 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act came into effect, and it was radical. Federal anti-discrimination law ensures equal access to employment opportunities and public accommodations for people with disabilities. With this act, Congress identified the full participation, inclusion, and integration of people with disabilities into society as a national goal. And if you've ever traveled to other countries, you can see that it's not the same. There's not that same universal inclusion. I would say it's probably not universal in this country, but it's very, very common that I can take part in activities as a person in a wheelchair without barriers. So I'd like to talk a little bit about languaging. I never liked the word handicapped because I don't think there's anything handy about it. Some people say handy capable, physically challenged, disabled, alternately abled, confined to a wheelchair. Confined to a wheelchair is the opposite of what it is because the wheelchair really frees us. It's not confining us, it's what frees us. I like to say I use a wheelchair. When I make a restaurant reservation, I say 2 people and I use a wheelchair. It's a descriptive term, it's not a label. And then I'd like to look at how much is embedded in our language. We say, step up to the plate, stand up for yourself, a step in the right direction, walk your walk, stand by your man, take a stand, put your best foot forward. What if you don't have a best foot? Stay 1 step ahead, no leg to stand on, put my foot down, on equal footing, walk with me, turn a blind eye. And even in our Jewish tradition, we have words like halacha, amidah, tzah lifnei mi'ata omed, gam ki elech begetz hamavet. And in the Asher Yatzar, efshar lehitkayem v'la'amod lefanecha, which when I say it, I change la'amod to lavo. I say efshar lehitkayem v'lavo lefanecha. And then we have the places in our service when we're leading services that we instruct people to stand. So I've heard many different ways of people being aware of their languaging, saying please rise in body or in spirit, please rise if you are able, please rise in any way that you are able, shift your posture. Instead of aliyah la Torah, I've heard nazmin la Torah, which I think is beautiful. And I also want to recognize that there's a rich sitting tradition in Judaism. And, I often say that I've been doing a 30-year sitting meditation, and there are many phrases that have the root shin beit, shave. Ashrei yoshvei veitecha, shivti beveit Adonai kol yemei chayai, hine matov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad, V'shivti b'veit Adonai la'orech yamim, v'shivtecha b'veitecha u'b'lechtecha b'derech. The word Shabbat, which can mean the day that we sit, and the word Shuva has Shin Bet in it. So, when we're in the throes of a deep Shuva process, we need to sit with it, right? So how can we help a person going through loss associated with disability? In the four-world model, in Asiya, physical, in our shuls, we can have ramps up to the bima, wide aisles. We can have large print sidurim available. When I was the interim rabbi at Temple Emek Shalom in Ashland, they had a bima that rose and went down. Just because when it was constructed years ago, that person who made it was aware that somebody who was sitting might need to be using it. So that was beautiful. Don't consider the wheelchair a personal space. So just like we have body boundaries, I have wheelchair boundaries. I don't like it when people touch my wheelchair or lean on my wheelchair or use my wheelchair as a table or hang things on my wheelchair. I once had somebody put a bag on the back of my wheelchair that I didn't discover for a couple of days. And then suddenly, I'm looking back there, I'm like, what's that back there? Who put that there? I've been going around with it, unaware. So that's not respectful. Also, I always think it's nice when somebody either bends down to my level or sits down next to me and I'm not looking up at them and straining my neck to speak with them. On the Bria level, the intellectual, there's wheelchair etiquette. Be respectful. Don't talk to the person who's with me, my caregiver or the person who's helping me out at the airport. Talk to me. Look me in the eyes. And don't help me without asking. Don't make assumptions. So Julia Watts-Belzer, in her wonderful new book, Loving Our Own Bones, Disability, Wisdom, and the Spiritual Subversive of Knowing Ourselves Whole. This is the book. It is great. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful book. She says, strangers on the street are quick to give me unsolicited aid. People rush to open doors, to get out of the way, to give me a hand. Sometimes those impulses are genuinely helpful. More often than not, they're paternalistic and invasive, especially when would-be helpers don't bother to consult me before jumping in. And then if we say something about that, we run the risk of seeming ungrateful when someone's trying to help. So it's tricky. On the emotional level, Yitzirah, compassionate listening, having patience. Don't assume someone is suffering because they're handicapped. Have awareness, not pity. Pity is an inappropriate sadness. Nancy Mears says in her book, Waist High in the World, A Life Among the Non-Disabled, to know that one arouses dismay and fear and pity simply sickens the spirit of anyone, whether sound of mind or limb or not. And on the spiritual level, Atzilut, it's all about surrender and gratitude. Avram Addison, in Seeking and Soaring, talks about the recognition of our own powerlessness and surrender to God, to our situation, and reaching a place of acceptance. Rabbi Nachman said, Dear God, let my heart grasp the profound wisdom with which you created this world. Help me understand that life's difficulties are in fact her opportunities. Life's endings are also her beginnings. Life's disappointments are her finest teachers. From Likutei Maharal. Rachel Naomi Remen, in her book My Grandfather's Blessings, says, through illness and disability, people may come to know themselves for the first time and recognize not only who they genuinely are, but also what really matters to them. As a physician, I have accompanied many people as they have discovered in themselves an unexpected strength, a courage beyond what they would have thought possible, an unsuspected sense of compassion, or a capacity for love deeper than they had ever dreamed. Rabbi David J. Cooper says, most people with disabilities today do not want prayers that say that their condition is of a lower madrega, that God should lift them up above it. Better that people should lift themselves and society to a madrega where obstacles to full participation are not placed in the path of those with disabilities. This would benefit us all. Julia Watts-Belzer challenges the notion that disability is part and parcel of the world we long to leave behind. She quotes a story about a deaf child in religious school. The teacher promised her that one day, in the world to come, you will be able to hear. The child responded, no, in the world to come, God will sign. Right? Good one, right? So let's look at disability in the Tanakh. Moses stuttered. Isaiah had unclean lips, and Ezekiel was mute for years. Isaac was blind, Jacob had a limp, and Saul had suffered from profound depression.
Mhm.
In this book, Loving Our Own Bones, Julia Watts-Belzer goes in detail into all of those stories, which I am not going to do, but if you're interested, it's a wonderful book. For me, the most striking in the Tanakh is in Parshat Emor, Leviticus 21. And so I'd like to share that. And there we go. So does somebody want to read the Hebrew, English, either? Or I could read it. Zaber, yeah? Somebody want to read?
God says to Aaron, no man of your descendants throughout the generations who has a mum shall come close to bring an offering to God, because every man who has a mum would know not to come close. Not a blind man, not one who is lame, with a slit nose or a limb too long,
Sorry, hold on.
whose broken leg, or broken hand, or hunchback, or dwarf, or one in his eye, or a festering eruption, or a feverish rash, or a crushed testicle. He shall not approach the veil or the holy altar, because he is mum, and he may not desecrate my holy places, for I am Yah who sanctifies them.
Right. So that's a very intense passage. Does anybody want to say how you would translate the word mum? You know, it's not a word that's used a lot. We don't really know exactly how it's translated.
Really,
What?
it can be an injury who's been injured.
They're not all injuries.
That's true. They're not some of birth things, and yeah.
You know, dwarf.
Would it be like an imperfection?
Yeah. Yeah, it could be flaw, a blemish, disability, imperfection.
Different from others.
So,
A dwarf may not be imperfect, but
right, right.
mm,
So, this is a very difficult parsha. You know, if you get a bar mitzvah kid who has this parsha, or if someone, you know, when Rabbi Belzer was asked, how do you reconcile this passage? She said, I don't. And she believes that this passage shows the deep disdain for disabled people that runs through so much of our history, our culture, and our sacred narratives. She sees this passage as a powerful testament to the way that humans have imagined God in our own image, the way we have endowed God with our own prejudices. So there are texts in the Torah that seem absolutely terrible in our world today. Texts that at the literal level seem discriminatory, misogynist, homophobic, cruel, and even dangerous. What do we do with these texts? How do we reinterpret them? This particular text hits hard for me, not only, as Belzer says, as a visceral reminder that our bodies are often judged as undesirable, but personally, it actually caused harm in my family. My father had a beautiful voice and was a frequent Shliach Tzibur prayer leader in our Orthodox congregation when I was growing up. This was something deeply meaningful to him, spiritually, and a true gift to his community. Later in life, he had his leg amputated because of diabetes, and he never led services again. He told me it was because he was a mum, and he said it with a little shame in his tone. So this is a cruel interpretation of Torah, and I believe not the intention. And as a rabbi, I feel called to bring some sense and understanding to those terrible texts and help to renew them for our time. In our brachas, before and after the Torah reading, we say Notain HaTorah, not Natan HaTorah. Blessed are you, God, who gives the Torah, not who gave the Torah. The Torah is wisdom literature. It is relevant across time and space, as relevant for us today as it was for our ancestors throughout time and all over the world. And it is incumbent upon us to reinterpret and find meaning. We say Eitz Chaim Hi, the Torah is alive, as alive for us as it was 3,300 years ago. And what brings the Torah alive is our participation, our continued reinterpretation. It is our central religious obligation to wrestle with the texts and renew them for our time. We are Yisrael, God wrestlers, and we are guided by the principle of Daracheha Darkei Noam, V'chol Netivoteha Shalom. The paths of Torah are paths of pleasantness, and all of her pathways are peaceful and whole. It is our task to reinterpret the terrible texts of Torah into Netivot Shalom, paths of peace. We are not literalists. We are not fundamentalists. We are Yisrael. So I want to share again a passage from Pirkei Avot. Here we go. So I'll read the Hebrew, and then if somebody wants to read the English. Ben Bagbag Omer, Hafoch ba v'hafoch ba, Dekulo ba, Uba techazi v'siv uvleva, Uminela tazua, She'ein lecha midah tova himena. Somebody want to read the English?
Then Bogbog would say, turn it over and turn it again, because all is contained in it. And look into it, and grow old and gray with it. And stir not from it, for you have no better rule than this.
That actually was one of Reb Zalman's favorite passages. So everything in Torah can be turned over and turned over until we can just shake out a new and more current meaning that we can resonate with. So we can use the Pardes method to turn this text over and over and unpack it so that we can live with it. So Pardes, as we know, is an acronym for Pshat, the simple meaning, Remez, the hinted meaning, Drash, the metaphor or fable, and Sod, the secret hidden meaning behind the words. So on the Pshat level, imperfect humans should not approach the holy altar. The priests were God's representative and should be physically perfect, godlike. As Belzer says, through the institution of the priesthood, the Torah designates a few ideal servants to mediate between God and the rest of the Israelites. And those people represent the divine presence. So the priests were held to a stringent standard of physical appearance. And Midrash Vayikra Rabbah makes explicit that no one is barred from offering a sacrifice, regardless of their physical appearance. In this regard, the Midrash reminds us that only implements like hammers, Kohanim, the priests, and the sacrifices must lack blemishes. Only in them is a blemish a disqualification. So on the level of remez, hint, reframing, if we look at the historical context, Judith Antonelli, in her book In the Image of God, a feminist commentary on the Torah, said, in the world at that time, mutilation of priests was common. The Torah was distinguishing the Hebrew priesthood from the surrounding culture's priesthood. Priestly castration was common. Entire sects of eunuch priests existed in Western Asia. The priests of Baal cut themselves with knives until the blood gushed out upon them. In Roman times, the priests gashed themselves with knives and poured their blood onto the altar. She says, the amputation of children's fingers was thought to be an excellent means of moving the gods to cure the ailments of a nobleman. And the Egyptians dedicated severed hands of war captives to the god Ammon. Thus, there must have been a significant number of mutilated people living in the pagan world. Skin gashing and flagellation were often practiced at religious rites and could cause permanent mutilation. Antonelli believes that this was the Torah's attempt to stop all of this. Thus, the priest had to be whole, perfect, and unmutilated. And on the drash level, we know that blemishes and disabilities can be the catalysts that force us to wrestle with our own fears and inadequacies and to grow. Rabbi Shefa Gold said, Amor is a paradox. There is no perfection in nature. We are all flawed. We are both perfect and imperfect. She says, there are times when I look into this world and into blemishes of my own character, and I am shown the perfection of the whole. Those blemishes that might have disqualified me from the priesthood actually become the doorways into my power as a priest. It is only when I deny those blemishes or hide them from God that my offerings are rejected. When I enter through them, I can touch the perfection within all imperfection. When I enter through them, I can touch the perfection within all imperfection. That's beautiful. And then finally, on the sod level, the gematria of Mum is 86, which is the same as Elohim, Hateva, and Hallelujah. So we can say that imperfection is natural, it's divine, and we can always find what to be grateful for. So it is perfect. We are love. All is clear, and we are holy. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Yeah, in working out these Torah portions, I realized it's really the soul that needs to be perfect. The soul is perfect, and because we're human, so we're going to be imperfect. We even realize, God's imperfect, and we're a reflection of God. So thank you. Does anybody have any questions or any comments for Reb Sue? Let's go on, Julie.
I remember my father, who taught world literature, told me that the word perfect was a terrible word. He said, when a thing is perfect, it's done. It's dead. You know, that we
Uh-huh,
just threw that word away, basically.
uh-huh. I've heard that before. There was a rabbi in our community who said his mother forbid he and his siblings from using that word because it didn't exist.
Mhm.
That's great. That's great. I believe it. Thank you.
Or we need to reframe that word, perfection.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Anyone else have any comment or a question? Well, Rabbi Sue, this was wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank
Thank
you.
you all for being here. Get this book.
Yes,
Got
Does
it.
it come out backwards on the camera?
no,
No,
it's fine.
No.
Yerusha, I'm facilitating a book discussion on loving your own bones with Yerusha. So
Great.
tuned. And thank you, Rabbi Sue. It's good to see you, and I hope we see each other again on.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
thank you.
Everyone have a
So,
great
Thanks,
week.
everybody.
In July, we are honoring Rabbinic Pastor Shulamit Fagan. So connect with the the video birthday card, and I guess somewhere along the way we'll have a birthday party for her. And then we are blessed in August to have Dr. Brielle Ressler, Rabbi Brielle Ressler, doing Psalms and pastoral counseling. So stay tuned. We have a lot of exciting things happening.
thank you.
Thank you,
Good hope,
Fida.
everybody.
Thank you.